RT317, Improving Safety Performance Through Operational Excellence. RT317 will introduce the team's Operational Excellence Assessment tool and show how it can benefit any organization's safety performance. Owner panel members will discuss the tool's value for owners, and contractor panelists will highlight its distinct value for contractors. Here to present their findings are Kristopher Cravey, Vice President Business Services, Day & Zimmermann. Christopher Janusz, Construction Manager, Consolidated Edison Company of New York. Christopher Gardenhour, Supervisor, Construction Manager, Architect of the Capitol. And the moderator for the panel, Gabriel B. Dadi, Assistant Professor, University of Kentucky.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Chris Gardenhour, and I'm with the Office of the Architect of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Before we get started, my colleagues and I, we'd like to recognize our industry partners. They did a great job in supporting and contributing to this effort. So, why are we here? When you look at the total recordable incident rate chart, you'll see that we had a period of time where we had decreasing incident rates. And then from 2006 to 2015, we have flatlined. Our safety performance just has not changed. So we are doing good, but we can definitely do better. I know every one of you in this room, you're just like me and that you care. And I know that when we hear construction worker dies, falls 10 stories to his death, I know every one of you thinks, wow, that could have been prevented. There must have been a breakdown somewhere, a breakdown in process. So it's time. It's time for us as an industry. It's time for us as CII members. It is time for us to innovate, to think of new ways to improve safety. It is time for us to disrupt, to change course, to identify what's not working and to fix it. And it's time for us to transform safety, to transform it just like we did many years ago. And how are we going to do this? How are we going to drive down to zero? That's the essential question of this study. We're going to do this through operational excellence. It's time to innovate, it's time to disrupt, and it's time to transform safety. In today's presentation, we have 3 learning objectives. The first is enhanced knowledge of operational excellence within construction project safety. We want you to know, we want you to understand what operational excellence is and how it will benefit your organization. Second, we want you to have the ability to assess and improve construction project safety through operational excellence. What's working, what's not working. In other words, what are your gaps so you can fill those gaps. And third, we want to introduce to you the Operational Excellence Assessment tool to improve safety performance. We want you to be able to quantify and measure your operational excellence performance. So now, I'd like to introduce Chris Janusz. Chris is Construction Manager with Edison of New York. Chris?
Thank you, Chris. Good morning. So as Chris just mentioned, operational excellence is a big part of our presentation, but more importantly, a big part of our assessment tool. So we need to define what is operational excellence when it comes to construction project safety. If I surveyed this room, I'd probably get a lot of different answers, some based on your company's outlook, some personal experience. And the reason I could say that for RT317, we face the same challenge and spent a lot of time just defining what operational excellence is. But as you see on the screen, operational excellence for us is doing the right thing, the right way, every time, even when no one is watching. So what does that actually mean to us? Doing the right thing could be something as simple as staying within your training competencies to complete a task. The right way could be strict adherence to policy and procedures. Every time, we believe that schedules, outages, budgets should not affect a team's performance when it comes to operational excellence. The key part of this definition is the last part. Even when no one is watching. Right now, can we say with confidence that we know that our teams, our contractors, our subs, our vendors are working and doing it the right thing, the right way every time? Whether it's, somebody just said no. Whether it's in the middle of the afternoon, in the middle of the week, or on that night shift on the weekend. Do we have that confidence that they're following this definition of operational excellence? And this is what we want to try to decipher a little bit more as we talked about transforming more of our mindset. Not just being compliance-based companies, but being desire-based. Where somebody comes into work every day and looks at this, and not just as a mantra or as a poster, but says, that's what I want to do. I want to do the right thing, the right way, every time. It doesn't matter who's around. And so as we look at this, we're going to take this through this assessment tool, have us answer this question in different areas, at the corporate level, the project level, and the site level. But to kind of help us a little bit more on operational excellence and getting it right, and what does that mean to us as we continue on this journey of operational excellence, we're going to turn to Alabama football team and their viewpoint on operational excellence.
Players have faith in their coach largely because of a revolutionary approach he designed years ago called the process. Ignore the scoreboard Saban preached to his players. Don't worry about winning. Just focus on doing your job at the highest level, every single play, and the wins will follow.
The approach was to challenge the players to play every play in the game like it had a history and life of its own, and tried to take the other team out of the game and make it all about us in terms of what we did.
It's like jumping out of a plane without a chute.
Yeah.
I mean, in your business, what, we're not going to focus on winning?
Right, but it really is the simple way to do it, and it's the best way to do it.
Star quarterback A.J. McCarron was involved in the one play that epitomizes just how deeply the process has been programmed into Alabama's players. Late in the blowout win over Notre Dame in the 2013 championship game, McCarron and his center Barrett Jones called different plays at the line of scrimmage. Both insisted they were right. A bizarre shoving match ensued on national TV. Saban loved it.
The game's probably won. And they're
it's
still
42 to 14.
They're still trying to get it right, which to me is the kind of pride in performance that you want in the players.
Can you see the critics saying, come on, coach, just take a breath, relax, enjoy the moment?
I can see people saying that, but we're still coaching. We're trying to get them to do it right. I don't ever want the players to relax in a game.
Saban urges his team to do things the right way all the time. So when this player arrived late for a meeting because he was busy taking out his earrings, it didn't go over well.
Number one thing, be on time. Because it shows you care. All you're telling me is your earrings are more important than your damn football.
So Coach Saban's idea of operational excellence is getting it right, and he calls it the process. In RT 317, we wanted to get it right. So we developed an operational excellence model, basically a comprehensive safety management system. We AKA it the gold standard for operational excellence. So what is involved in this gold standard tool? One, it'll take a look at your safety culture, currently that you're in now. Two, it'll look at to see what written safety policies and what have you put into procedure. The great thing about this tool is going to now take a look at the behavior. Do our workers actually know why they're following certain procedures and understand the policy and how they're practicing that? One of the great things of this tool is we've actually locked it into over 300 specification measurements. These will be data points that you can actually take a look at to actually measure yourself. One, to see your strengths, but two, really, to see where the gaps are. Are the gap at the corporate level, project level, site level, and there is even an assessment tool down to the craft level. Through all this operational excellence model and being the gold standard, we realized that we're driving to the question that we heard in the beginning this morning from Steve is, how do we continue to drive to zero injuries, zero fatalities? A question that we've been dealing with for decades. So we turn to another hard question, cup of coffee. This is not a subliminal message for you to go get coffee. This is to stay here and just look at how we developed our model through the critical to quality tree. Excellent cup of coffee is sometimes hard to define. You have drivers to answer that: taste, temperature, cost. And through all that, then you need something to verify the quality of those drivers. Maybe for taste, it's acidic versus rich. Maybe for temperature, you have a variable, what you like based on your palate. And then we all know what it takes to put our hand in our pocket to get a good cup of coffee. So you take something that's very difficult to measure and you break it down to a measurable portion that you can actually handle, and now look at each area to see where you need to be. So it is with our model. We took that critical quality tree, we broke it out. We have 4 levels. Our operational excellence drivers, there are a total of 13 operational excellence drivers related to construction project safety, and I'll get into that in the next slide. For this example, though, I'm going to use one of our drivers, which is employee engagement. The next level is the critical to safety. These are going to be questions that are going to be asked related to, do you have a written policy in place? For employee engagement, it could be the question that you would see is, do the supervisors or new hires that come on get the chance to actually review all health and safety policies? Third is a level of critical expectations. We have roughly about close to 300 of those questions that are going to relate back to the critical to safety concept. And on this example, we would say, and it relates back to behaviors and process. What process do you have in place so that a supervisor can review health and safety policies? And then finally, as I mentioned, you have specifications and measurements. There are over 300. And these will answer the question to see how well we're doing with the critical expectation, the behavior process. And in this example, we'd have one that would say, so actually, what is the actual percentage of the supervisors on site that actually review your health and safety policies? So through all this, as I said, our operational excellence drivers are the key and the backbone of our model. You'll see up on the screen a total of 13 operational excellence drivers, all relating back to the question about 0 injuries. Our top 10 are more behavioral. They include employee engagement, human performance, learning organization, owner's role, recognition and reward, risk awareness management, tolerance, strategic safety, communication, subcontract management, training and competence, and worksite organization. The great thing about the behavioral these drivers is that they actually focus back on our definition of doing the right thing the right way. Our bottom 3 are more related around the cultural aspect, the cultural drivers that we face: just and fair practices and procedures, shared values, beliefs, and assumptions, and transformational leadership. These 3 focus on the back end of our definition every time when no one is watching. As you see in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the operational excellence drivers have their own set of CTS, critical safety questions, critical expectation questions, and their own specification measurements. We believe that the combination between behavioral and cultural drivers is key to continue to drive to 0 injuries. And a lot of the reason goes back to the joy model that we have seen, that we've talked about, we've even implemented in our own companies, where culture drives behavior and behavior sustains culture. But what does that mean? Through the right implementation of this model and the assessment and the feedback that you'll get from the end, you'll actually see where you need to drive in. Is it the culture that needs to change? Is it the behavior? Is it a little bit of both? And at what level? Could it be at the corporate level, the site level, or the project level? And it also asks the question of, why don't the craft get it? We believe that through this implementation that you'll get the gold model standard for operational excellence related to construction project safety, which will also enhance not just 0 injuries, 0 fatalities, but also better decision-making in the field. So to take you a little bit deeper into the model and the methodology, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gabe Dadi, who will take you through that. Gabe?
Right. Thank you, Chris. As Chris just outlined for you, was our framework of our operational excellence model. And at this point in our research effort, we needed to begin to populate that model with actual policies, procedures, and practices that Chris just mentioned in the format of our model. So to do that, we certainly had some expertise on our research team through some external contacts within our research team as well, but we certainly had a broad database of previous research and efforts by other organizations that helped formulate the real driving content of our model. So to do that, we first went and searched for this idea of operational excellence, which, tracking back to some work by DuPont, was initially defined as operational discipline. So certainly a lot of that work formed the foundation of our overall model. Then on top of that, we needed to put in some actual safety research. And there's certainly been a lot of efforts between CII and the Construction Users Roundtable, or CURT, in some really high-quality safety research. So obviously you guys, as CII members, are likely aware of the zero accident techniques. So much of that made its way into our model in some form or another. CURT has their owner safety blueprints, some tools on subcontractor management, and other items. Certainly we're able to refresh and revise a lot of those previous high-quality efforts into this overall operational excellence model. Then we're able to take some innovative behavioral and cultural tools. Janusz just talked about the DeJoy model, where we want to assess and understand behaviors, but we also want to assess and evaluate our culture. And so some tools, culture-wise, from Zurich, and some other behavioral tools from Toyota and the Institute of Nuclear Power Operators, or INPO, gave us those innovative tools. Some additional resources not mentioned here also made its way in, but in combination, once you add that operational discipline with a lot of high-quality safety research and tools in behavior and culture, we feel like we have a comprehensive safety management system that we feel like represents the gold standard. So at this point, we had the framework of the model, we had defined operational excellence, and we populated our model, but we wanted to make sure what was in there was relevant and necessary towards driving us towards that definition of operational excellence that Janusz walked through. So we had primarily a three-phase effort in this regard towards refining the model. Certainly internally within our research team, we held several face-to-face meetings and several webinars where we asked the question, does the components of this model drive us towards this idea of operational excellence? And obviously, importantly, does this help us improve safety performance? So things were modified, added, and deleted based on that review. Externally, we went and talked to subject matter experts in areas that were relevant to their expertise. So we talked to some safety culture experts with Zurich. We talked to a behavior-based safety expert. We talked to some folks who previously worked for DuPont and consulted to DuPont to, again, help us refine that model to make sure everything in there was relevant and necessary towards getting us towards zero accidents. And then finally, we conducted an external validation survey. So this was a survey that went out to CII and CURT member companies. A lot of you all in the room represented, likely participated in this effort, where we went and asked, again, does the contents of this model help us define operational excellence, and does this help us improve our safety performance? And this survey actually went out to both individuals in safety and operations, all the way down to the site level, all the way up to the executive home office level of your organizations. We had over 90 respondents to this survey, so we feel like between that internal expertise, the subject matter experts externally, and this validation survey, that this model was well scrubbed, and so it's important and valid, the contents of it. So taking a step back and looking at the overall scope of this operational excellence model, Janusz outlined we have over 300 different metrics that are outlined in here. That's a lot to undertake. So this is not something that's overnight. This isn't necessarily a quick fix, silver bullet thing to help you get to zero. So we wanted to provide member companies some guidance as to what might be good areas to start. And so we conducted an analytic hierarchy process, or AHP. It has an ASTM standard with it. That's essentially a pairwise comparison survey where we ask, does safety driver X lead us to better or worse safety performance than safety driver Y, and to what degree does it help us or hurt us in comparison between those two? The results of which you see on this table here, where drivers at the top, such as the owner's role, worksite organization, and shared values, beliefs, and assumptions, were rated highly by respondents, meaning that these might be good drivers for you to take some initial investigation in your organization, whereas drivers at the bottom, such as recognition and rewards, weren't rated as highly. Certainly not to say that a recognition and rewards program is not important. It's not saying that that doesn't help us improve safety, but within the scope and constraints of our model, that may be a driver that you wait and investigate till later on. This calculation allowed us, or this process allowed us to calculate a consistency ratio to make sure our results were reliable and valid. Our ratio was a 0.027. Anything less than a 0.1 is considered acceptable per that ASTM standard. So we feel like we got some good results from that survey as well. So at this point, we went out to actual construction projects and asked them to assess their level of adherence to this operational excellence model, and we'll talk about the results of this over the next few slides here. The way this is going to be represented is through a radar plot, where around the perimeter you have the safety drivers that we've already outlined, and the scores will be from a 0% up to 100%, where 0% means there's absolutely no alignment, no adherence to what we had spelled out in the model, 100% being full alignments to what was outlined. And so results here around the perimeter, the further out you go, would be better. Before I pull up the actual results, I do want to guide your attention to the legend of this radar plot at the bottom there, where it reads corporate level, project level, and site level. After defining and creating this model, we realized, as Janusz mentioned earlier, that we outlined policies, we outlined procedures, and we outlined practices. And those actually map nicely to a generic project hierarchy structure. Certainly, each one of your organizations may have a different org chart and different titles for your employees, but those policies are typically written and evaluated or created at the home office at the executive level. Those procedures enable your policies at the project level, and then they're actually executed out in the field at the site level and in the form of practices. So when we created our assessment tool that we'll get into shortly, we have this assessment where your corporate level executive in charge of safety and health might answer those questions. Someone at the project level would obviously answer the project level questions, and then someone out at the site would respond to those site level assessments. And we found some interesting results when we did this. So first here is the results of the corporate level responses. So to kind of walk you through how this reads out, at the very top there, the driver of employee engagement, every single corporate level respondent to our assessment felt like they had a fully implemented and created employee engagement program based on how we had it described. And similarly with the driver subcontractor management down at the bottom left of that radar plot, other drivers did not score as well. So let's look at the project level here in blue and the site level in green, and you'll notice a phenomenon here where for many of these drivers, the scores were not as high as you made it your way out into the field. And we'll look at this in more detail on the next slide, but one that obviously jumps out at you is this idea of transformational leadership. So in our driver of transformational leadership, which was one of our cultural ones that Janusz outlined previously, this is assessing whether you have a program in place to develop or to assess whether or not you have transformational leaders as opposed to transactional leaders in your organization. So a transformational leader is the one that can inspire and create this culture change that drives the behaviors that, again, sustain our culture, going back to that DeJoy model. So this is important for us to understand whether we have those people in our organizations that can help us change our culture and sustain our culture through those transformational leaders. Transactional leader is more of a give and take situation. If you do X, then I'll give you Y type thing. So we want those transformational ones to, again, inspire that culture change to improve our organizations. And one thing I'll note about this idea of a transformational leader, this is not dependent on a job title. Anyone on your projects and anyone in your organization can be a transformational leader. It does not come with a job title. So that's why it is important to understand, are those people out in the field every day that can help change the behaviors of their coworkers out on our construction projects? So again, looking at this phenomenon of a decreasing awareness as we go from corporate down to the site. So you see some drivers there across the horizontal axis and their corresponding percent decrease in awareness of your safety policies as you go from the corporate level down to the site level. The one that jumps out at you, obviously, is this transformational leadership one, which I went through in good detail. But you'll note there's still a handful of other drivers that had in between a 20 to 30% decrease in awareness. So anecdotally, this may be something that you think happens in your organizations. Someone at your home office, at your executive level, are writing these policies, but there may be some disconnect as it gets out to the people executing those policies out in the field. So that was one of our interesting findings, and one of the unique aspects of this assessment tool that Dr. Cravey is going to outline here shortly is that we have the ability to see to what degree this is happening on our projects in regard to these different safety drivers, and to what degree this is actually happening. And so, as I mentioned, we went out to actual construction projects to see their level of adherence to this operational excellence model. We had over 70 respondents, individual respondents to that effort across 25 different projects, but only 9 projects participated at the level where you had a corporate response, a project response, and a site response. So when we aggregated those scores for those individual 9 projects, you see the results here on this slide. And this is as a function of a % of our model adhered to. So there in that solid green is the operational excellence score attained as a percentage. That faded green is essentially what was left on the table, the room for improvement for those individual projects. And our takeaway from this is that most of these projects fall in that 50 to 70% range. Given the fact that these projects are represented by organizations that are leaders globally in safety, and a lot of the leaders across the world of dedicating resources and effort to addressing safety, we were pleased to see that we didn't propose a model that was so aggressive that the scores were down near 0. But we're also pleased to see that we didn't challenge some of the leaders in our industry enough to where these scores were up near 100%. So there's still room for improvement for a lot of these projects and organizations. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Chris Cravey, Vice President of Day & Zimmermann and our research team chair, who's going to walk through our assessment procedure.
Thanks, Gabe. So I think I can speak for all of us when I say that when we look at CII research, or any research for that matter, I think the key question that comes to mind is feasibility. In other words, can I actually take this research back into my organization? Can I implement it in an efficient way that's going to give me results? And so as we developed the implementation resource guide, we really kept that in mind and said, how can we make this something that people can use within their organizations? So the first step of the implementation guide is to complete the operational excellence survey. You then begin to analyze the output of that survey to identify where your strengths and where your weaknesses are. We then provided some guidance around the culture assessment. So the culture is all about what is really driving how people behave and how they make decisions within the organization. And then lastly, step 4 is the corrective action plan. So it's looking at what are the gaps that we've identified in steps 1 through 3, and how do we begin to close those gaps. So let me unpack each of those a little bit. So step 1 is the operational excellence survey. So within our implementation guide, you will be able to deploy a survey at the corporate level, the project level, the site level, and with your owner. As Gabe had mentioned, the owner's role is a very important driver because the owner helps create the environment, sets some of the expectation that help drive some of the change and the culture within that particular site. At the corporate level, we're really looking at the policy. So how does our vision, how does our philosophy around safety and zero injuries, how does that translate into written policies that are based on data and measurement? When we look at the project level, we're really looking at how are those policies then translated into procedures? And then how are those procedures taken at the site and actually implemented? How are workers utilizing those, and what is the practice of that? So once the survey is completed, the tool then aggregates all of the data and gives you an operational excellence score. So very similar to what you might experience if you're doing a safety audit. Maybe you have an 80%, and that tells you that there's a gap. When you do this operational excellence survey, it tells you what your operational excellence score is. In other words, how well is your organization adhering to these operational excellence standards? So in this particular example, you can see that this particular project scored a 55.83 at the bottom. You'll notice that there are some drivers that are in green, which means that there's some maturity, there's some strength there. But there's also some that are in yellow, which is some caution, and some that are moving orange to red. But now is really the detail of saying, okay, well, where is the issue? Is it that the policies don't exist? Do we not have procedures? Are the people in the field, are they not getting it? Do they not understand? So you can then break the scores out a little bit further. And notice what you see at the corporate level. Corporate thinks everything's going fine, right? Everything's hunky-dory, right? We're in greens. Yeah, there's a couple of yellows. But notice when you start getting down to the project level, right, where your construction managers are, your project managers, now you're starting to see some yellows, some oranges, some reds that emerge. Look what happens when you get down to the actual site level. And this is one of the interesting aspects of our research that we found was this disparity between what corporate was espousing or what they believed was happening and what was actually being implemented in the field. But there was something that was being lost in translation. Now, once you have those scores and that information, you can then take those drivers and put them into a radar plot. So as Gabe described, the outer rim or the outer part of the web is where you want to be. So you can see in this particular project, there's some areas that are strong, like employee engagement, organizational learning, risk awareness, subcontractor management, the owner's role. But you'll also notice that there's some deficits here, right? Human performance, just and fair practices, safety communication, transformational leadership, and so on. So what this really tells you is very similar to James Reason's idea around the Swiss cheese model. Many of you who've been in safety, remember the Swiss cheese model, right? You have all these kind of slices of cheese, and each slice of cheese represents a barrier or a defense that prevents an injury from happening. It could be an engineered control, an administrative control, but it's all of these defenses we put in place from an injury to happen. But as Reasons talks about is that each of our barriers have holes in them. And when all those holes align, then you have an injury. So what this tool actually helps you identify is that each of these 12 drivers you have listed here are your barriers, they're your defenses, they're your slices of cheese, but it's showing you where are the holes, where are the gaps in your organization that we need to begin to address and begin to focus our attention on. Step 3 is really looking at the safety culture assessment. Now I know that as engineers, as construction folks, we enjoy quantitative data, right? We love it. Statistics, it's our favorite. The challenge with quantitative data is it tells you what might be happening, it tells you where to look, but it doesn't answer the question of why. And there is a qualitative aspect to this with safety, and we're talking about human beings, is that we're actually looking at why are these phenomena happening? What is actually driving people's behavior and how they make decisions? And so all of us within our organizations no doubt talk a lot about safety culture, am I right? The importance of safety culture. But it's also very difficult to assess. But we all know that if you have a project that is driven by schedule or cost or productivity, that oftentimes safety can take a back seat. So being able to go out to your projects and say, what's really driving behavior? What's truly valued at this particular project? Because whatever's valued, whatever's rewarded, whatever's incentivized, those are the things that people tend to focus on. And those are the things that tend to drive people's behavior and how they make decisions. So within the implementation resource, we provided some guidance on how to do these assessments. And one way that you might look at it is that if you have 2 projects, maybe one project has a really strong operational excellence score and the other one not so much. Go talk to people at the site that did well and the site that didn't do so well, and what's the difference? Is it that we brought somebody in, a construction manager in from another company, and we didn't have time to really acculturate them and help them understand our process and our values? Is it we have a really good athlete here that embodies and models the way, but over here we don't? What are some of those differences that are driving people's behavior so that we can have sustainability at every single project and not just pockets of excellence? And then finally, step 4 is developing the corrective action. Now, most of us have corrective action plans or programs within our companies. So this is really all about looking at what are the gaps in our organizations from steps 1 through 3. Is there a challenge within our culture? Is there a challenge that maybe that's not translating into written policies? Is there an issue with our procedures? The truth is, most of us probably have procedures that look like this when it comes to environmental health and safety, am I right? But are those procedures actually being implemented? Are workers knowledgeable of those? Are they implementing those into the field? How is it affecting how they interact and behave in the work? How about specification and measurements? How well are we measuring it? Maybe we're measuring, yes, everyone's completing a pre-job brief, but are we actually going back and assessing the quality of that brief? Are the craft engaged in the brief? Have we not only identified hazards, but have we mitigated those hazards? So this is all about identifying where are those areas and how do we begin to close the gaps. So what is the value that this research brings to CII membership? The first is that we have developed a comprehensive safety management system, an operational excellence model. So as Gabe pointed out, we have stood on the shoulders of giants here at CII, at CURT, and other organizations. And we have brought together the zero injury techniques and all of the other best practices around leading indicators and really looked at, we need a comprehensive safety management system, something that looks at it holistically, from culture to policies to procedures to how the workers begin to implement that in the field and how do you begin to measure it. So this is a tool that you can take back and look at your own organization and say, hey, how well do we align to some of these? There are some areas that you may have, some that you may be very mature, some that may be gaps. We've also provided you with a tool where you can take that survey, implement it at the corporate, project, and site level, and get yourself an operational excellence score. See how well you adhere to the standard. Begin to identify what are some of the areas where we have gaps and weaknesses. Another key aspect of this tool is that it's preventative. It really is a leading indicator type tool. Because we're not talking about looking at something after the injuries occurred, but we're talking about really looking at our safety management system holistically. Identifying those areas of the Swiss cheese. Where are the holes in our process? Where are the holes in our model? And how do we begin to close those models? It allows you to evaluate your organization horizontally from corporate to site. Is there discrepancy between what corporate believes is actually happening and what's being implemented in the field? It also helps you look horizontally from site to site. Do we have one project that performs well and another not so well? And why do we have that inconsistency? How do we get repeatability within our safety performance? And lastly, and I think this is the most important, it's around performance. As Chris Gardenhour showed in the beginning, we had flatlined in safety performance. Now, I was excited to see Steve's slide earlier on really a record year that we had in safety. But the thing that we have to remember is that anything above 0 means that people in our employ are getting harmed, are getting injured. In some cases, fatalities are happening. It's affecting families. It's affecting people's livelihoods. And we may look at those numbers and say, hey, we're doing pretty good. But when you start to unpack it and you say, you know, what are the impacts of that? And how do we really drive down to 0? Because I would say that anything above 0 is unacceptable. So how do we as an organization drive to 0? And our passion behind this model was really to innovate, to help you take a model and go back and disrupt your organization, to move past flatline safety performance and begin to transform your organization so that we can achieve 0 injuries. Some of you might think, well, 0 injuries isn't possible, but I bet if I were to ask people to raise your hand in here and say, how many of you have achieved 0 injuries on a project, I bet there'd be a lot of hands in here. I bet if I asked you, how many of you have gone 6 months on a project without an injury, that there'd be a lot of hands. A year, 2 years, 3 years. I know that there are people here who have projects that have gone that long without an injury. So the truth is, we have achieved 0 injuries. The challenge has been is that it's been in pockets. And what we're really hoping to do is create sustainability. where we can achieve repeatable, sustainable results time after time, to when one day we put that slide up there and there are 0 injuries that are occurring. Thank you so much for your time, and at this point we will open it up for questions. Thank you.
So there are some mic stands throughout the room. At this point, we do have a few minutes for questions. You will just come up and we'll be happy to answer them.
So with your assessment tool, how many people need to take that survey in an organization, and how long does it take for these surveys to be completed?
Okay, good question. For your first one, the number of people for a project, we have actually included in the implementation resource, it's sort of a 2-part implementation resource. One part is is the tool. The other part is the guide towards using the tool. And in the guide, it spells out, based on your project size, the number of employees on your projects, it actually spells out both at the corporate project and site level the number of individuals needed. And that's based on a statistically valid sample. So we do have some guidance in our user guide for that. And then to complete the assessment. So as Janusz outlined, there are several questions at each one of these levels. Based on our data collection effort, that corporate level survey took about 15 to 20 minutes to complete. That one's the shortest and quickest. The project level one was a little bit more involved, asked a little bit more specific questions about what's happening out on the project, and that ended up taking about 60 to 90 minutes for those individuals. At the site level, it asked the most detailed questions, and it actually asked both, do these policies and practices exist out on in the field, as well as is it formally written as an implementation piece? And that ended up taking those individuals about 2 hours to complete that assessment, and that's per individual. So it takes a while to get through it, but it's certainly something that we feel like has a lot of value on the back end of it. And that doesn't even get into the metrics piece. You know, we mentioned over 300 different leading indicator type metrics in this model. That obviously would take a good amount of time to collect that data. However, I'd imagine most of your organizations are tracking a good amount of those metrics already. So hopefully that answered your question.
In the bar graph that showed the 9 projects that were scored or rated,
yes,
there was one project, I believe it was project number 9, that had almost an 80% score, and I think on the low end it was just above 40%. Was the data back-checked against the number of injuries that may or may not have occurred on those projects to see if the higher-rated projects actually received fewer injuries?
Yes, so we actually did, in our data collection effort, ask them to self-report a recordable rate for that project. Some of those projects, of those 9, were kind of early on in their efforts, and so wasn't exactly the best data to pull any conclusions from that. Some of those were completed, but in general, this idea of improving safety performance, certainly that number is important and it's tracked as an industry, but we do feel like if you are closer to adhering to this model, going back to that Nick Saban video, you're doing that process the right way, and the scoreboard should reflect that increased effort. But that's an excellent, excellent question.
Did your tool include, over here, to your right, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. Did your tool include engineering and design impact to safety?
That's a good question. Engineering and design impact on safety. We did talk about certain elements like designing for safety in our model. A lot of it, though, is field-based. A lot of it is field behavior-based. So it's not, I wouldn't classify it as being really highly focused on anything engineering before it comes out to construction. But it does have some portions of the model dedicated to that. Yes.
One more question.
Oh, sorry. We've got time for maybe one more question. I didn't see that one.
Yeah, good morning. Your research specified that the owner's role had the greatest importance in driving better safety, a weight of 4.20, I think.
Yes.
What I was trying to understand, or if you guys can provide more information, is what's behind owner's role. So in other words, just as you guys break down what good coffee tastes like,
yes,
right? Can you break down what's behind owner's role so that we can have a better idea?
Yes, and if you, one thing I will plug real quick is at 2:45, at the 2:45 coffee break, we have a table right outside to the right where we will have some of our research team members there to answer questions, as well as the tool itself up there. The owner's role breaks down to things like, obviously on the surface, pre-qualifying subcontractors and contractors, but it does get into more involved behaviors of the owners. Do they participate in safety meetings out on the project with the contractor? Do they participate in walkthroughs and things like that? So certainly at the break, we should be able to answer that in much more detail for you. Yep, thank you.
As we wrap up, I'd actually like Dr. Bill Maloney, if you would stand. He's over here on the far right. Dr. Maloney, would you stand, please? Dr. Maloney was one of our principal investigators, and he retired this year from the University of Kentucky. And he has spent decades doing construction research and safety research for CII and many other organizations. And I just felt we owe him a great deal of gratitude and appreciation. Can we honor him for a moment? Dr. Maloney, appreciate you. Thank you.
Yep, thank you all.